So I want you to picture this guy in the early 90s, just drive around in his car, and he's listening to an audiobook on a cassette tape.
Okay, cassette tape, that takes me back.
Right. But the thing is, he isn't just listening to it once. He is like obsessively rewinding it, playing it over and over and over again.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he listens to this one single text more than 100 times. Like he lets the words seep so deeply into his subconscious that the physical magnetic tape literally wears out and snaps.
That's an incredibly vivid image.
It really is. And,
Hmm.
he credits this intense repetitive listening with completely transforming his reality, like helping him quit doing things he hated, discover his life's purpose, and eventually build a highly successful business.
It perfectly captures the transformative weight of the text we're looking at today, doesn't it?
Exactly. So welcome to today's deep dive. You, the listener, are joining us on a mission to explore that exact text. We are unpacking this really radical, practically century-old philosophy that claims our invisible thoughts are, well, not just fleeting ideas, but the literal, tangible architects of our physical reality.
Yeah, and the source material for this deep dive is a book called As You Think.
Right, and specifically, we're examining excerpts from that Driver's updated gender-neutral edit from 1991. The editor's name is Mark Allen.
Which I have to say, it's always fun to point out that despite sharing a last name, the editor, Mark Allen, has absolutely no relation to the original author, James Allen, who wrote the 1904 classic As a Man Thinketh.
Totally a coincidence. But he even quotes Goethe in the introduction to describe the sheer power of what he learned, saying, "Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it."
His dedication to making this text accessible to a modern audience is just profound.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. What is it about this specific century-old text that inspires someone to listen to it until the tape physically breaks?
Well, it ultimately comes down to the timelessness of the message. Like in the publisher's preface, there's this brilliant comparison made to the works of William Shakespeare.
Oh, right, because human life is just this endless, churning cycle of change.
Exactly. Every new generation struggles to relate to the one that came before it. Our language evolves, our technology shifts, our cultures completely transform.
Yeah, tell me about it.
But despite all that, certain voices manage to pierce through all the noise. They remain eternally relevant. They still give us goosebumps today because they speak to these universal, immutable truths about the human condition.
So the argument here is that this text isn't offering some trendy, temporary life hack.
No, not at all. It's offering a foundational operating system for human existence that the author believed was as true in 1904 as it is right now.
I love that. It's framed almost like the underlying source code for human reality.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
But, to understand how this book claims to actually rewrite that code and change lives, we have to start at the foundation. Like, we need to establish how the author believes the mind actually operates on a mechanical level.
Right. And the text anchors its entire philosophy on this one central aphorism. As we think in our hearts, so are we.
Which sounds nice, but it's more than just poetry, really.
Absolutely. The author takes this much further than just a poetic sentiment. He argues that this concept doesn't just describe a facet of our personality, it embraces the absolute entirety of our being.
So how does he explain the mechanics of that?
Well, James Allen relies on a really vivid, persistent analogy throughout the whole book. He states that the human mind is exactly like a garden.
Which is a beautiful image,
Mm.
right? But let's modernize that analogy for a second for you listening, just to really grasp the mechanism. It sounds a lot like a modern social media algorithm.
Oh, that's interesting. How so?
Well, an algorithm doesn't care if a video is good for you or bad for you,
Yeah.
right? It just relentlessly feeds you more of whatever you click on. It cultivates a feed based entirely on your inputs.
That is a phenomenal way to look at it. The garden metaphor functions on that exact same logic.
So it just grows whatever falls into it.
Exactly. The text explains that a garden or an algorithm can be intelligently cultivated, or it can be completely neglected and just allowed to run wild.
Right.
But here is the critical mechanism. Whether you deliberately cultivate it or completely ignore it, it must and will bring forth fruit. Nature abhors a vacuum.
So if you aren't planting anything good.
Right, if you do not deliberately plant useful seeds, which he defines as pure, constructive thoughts, then an abundance of useless weed seeds will inevitably fall in from your environment and just continue to reproduce.
Man, so there is absolutely no neutral state. Your mind is always growing something. Like if you aren't actively planting flowers, you are growing weeds by default just by existing in the world.
Precisely. We're constantly absorbing inputs. If we aren't filtering them and planting intentionally, well, the environment plants the weeds for us.
Now, I have to play devil's advocate here, because if I'm listening to this, I'm immediately looking for the loopholes.
Of course.
Because we all do things every single day that feel entirely disconnected from our active thoughts. We have knee-jerk reactions.
Like what?
Like, say someone cuts you off in traffic and you instantly snap. Or maybe you see someone drop their groceries and you make this sudden, unpremeditated gesture to help them. But what about those spontaneous acts? Surely those aren't meticulously planted thoughts, right? They just happen in a split second.
What's fascinating here is that the author anticipates that exact objection. He completely rejects the concept of a truly spontaneous act.
Wait, really? So none of it is spontaneous?
Not according to this. The text insists that every single act, no matter how fast or reflexive, springs from the hidden seeds of thought. It fundamentally could not have materialized without them.
Okay, so those spontaneous acts I just mentioned.
The author argues they're just the sudden, visible blooming of long-held internal conditioning.
Wow, so you're saying the snap in traffic isn't a reaction to the other driver in that specific moment?
Not at its core, no. From this philosophical standpoint, that aggressive snap is the harvest of thousands of tiny, unresolved frustrations and angry thoughts that you've been secretly watering in your mental garden for months.
Oh, that's heavy. So the traffic incident just provided the right weather for the weed to finally bloom.
That's exactly it. The text argues that we are made or unmade entirely by ourselves. In the armory of thought, we forge our own weapons of destruction, but we also fashion the tools to build what the author beautifully calls heavenly mansions of joy and strength and peace.
Which is an incredibly empowering concept, but honestly, it's also quite terrifying, because it ruthlessly strips away all of our excuses.
It really does. There's nowhere to hide.
And this bridges us perfectly to the next massive leap the book takes. Because it's one thing to say that my internal thoughts shape my character. But how does this internal mental landscaping literally dictate the external physical circumstances we have to deal with, like our bank accounts or our careers?
That is where the text makes its most radical claim. The author states unequivocally that circumstances do not make a person. Rather, they reveal a person to themselves.
Circumstances reveal a person.
Yes, the outer conditions of a person's life will always eventually be found to be harmoniously related to their inner mental state.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because the author highlights this massive psychological blind spot. It's a profound cognitive dissonance that almost all of us suffer from.
Oh, the fighting against circumstances.
Right. We spend our lives violently fighting against our circumstances, complaining about our terrible luck, while secretly nourishing and preserving the very cause of those circumstances in our own hearts.
We want the fruit to change, but we refuse to dig up the root.
Exactly. We desperately want the fruit on the tree to change, but we absolutely refuse to touch the roots.
That is the exact behavioral dynamic the book exposes. We're buffeted by outside conditions only as long as we falsely believe we are just fragile creatures affected by them.
Right. Playing the victim.
But the moment you realize you are the creative power, the rightful master of the hidden soil of your being, the circumstances are forced to shift because the mechanism creating them has shifted.
The source material grounds this in some very sharp, almost uncomfortably recognizable scenarios. Like, there are 3 specific examples here.
Yeah, let's go through them.
The first one describes this paradox of someone who is wretchedly poor and desperately desires better home comforts and a higher salary. But simultaneously, this same person constantly shirks their work duties.
And they deceive their employer, right?
They deceive their employer, internally justifying this behavior by telling themselves, well, my wages are just too low to warrant hard work.
It's a textbook example of self-sabotage through thought. I mean, this person consciously desires prosperity, but their dominant subconscious thoughts, and therefore their daily microactions, are rooted in deceit and laziness.
They don't get how prosperity actually works.
Exactly. The text points out that they don't understand the basic mechanical principles of true prosperity. By dwelling in deceptive thoughts, they are fundamentally incapable of producing high-value work, which means they're actually attracting even worse financial conditions to themselves.
So they're fighting the effect, poverty, while passionately feeding the cause.
Yes.
And then the text brilliantly flips that exact same script to show it works both ways.
Yeah.
It looks at the employer, too, the person paying those wages.
Right, the corrupt business owner.
Yeah, it describes a business owner who uses crooked, unethical measures to cut laborers' paychecks, entirely motivated by the desire to maximize their own wealth. But ultimately, this employer goes completely bankrupt. They lose their fortune, their reputation, everything.
And what's their immediate reaction?
They blame the economy, they blame circumstances.
Because it is psychologically easier to blame a tyrant circumstance than to examine your own mental garden.
It's always someone else's fault.
Right. But in the author's view, that employer is the sole architect of their ruin. They aimed at a good end profit, but they continually frustrated that goal by harboring greedy, exploitative thoughts.
Which eventually manifest as toxic business practices.
Exactly. Those practices destroyed trust, ruined the reputation, and ultimately collapsed the business.
I mean, you cannot plant a deceptive seed and act shocked when it doesn't grow into a prosperous tree.
You really can't. And the text uses a very stark agricultural truth to explain this mechanism. You cannot get corn from nettles.
Right.
Nothing can come from corn but corn, and nothing from nettles but nettles. The author views the universe as a system of absolute justice. Therefore, we don't get what we idly wish for or what we lazily pray for.
Wait, so wishes don't matter?
Not if they don't match your actions. We get exactly what we justly earn based on our dominant thoughts and the actions those thoughts produce. Our wishes are only ever fulfilled when they finally align with our internal conditioning.
Man, that is a remarkably tough pill to swallow. I mean, it places 100% of the accountability on the individual.
It does, but it's also incredibly freeing once you accept it.
It is. The logical through line is fascinating.
Yeah.
Now, I want to pivot here because the text takes this concept of thoughts dictating our reality and applies it to something even more intimate than our finances. It claims our thoughts literally dictate our physical health.
Yes, this is a big one. The body is presented in this philosophy as a highly sensitive instrument that responds rapidly, almost immediately, to the thoughts impressed upon it.
So, sickly thoughts make a sickly body.
Exactly. The author claims that sickly thoughts literally express themselves through a sickly body. There is a very dramatic detail in the text noting that the sheer physiological shock of fear has been known to kill a person as speedily as a bullet. Yeah, and that chronic anxiety is continually killing thousands of people slowly over time by breaking them down from the inside out.
Okay, I've got to stop you there and push back on this. Because to a modern listener, this part of the philosophy sounds dangerously close to victim blaming.
I can see why you'd say that.
Yeah, like if someone contracts a severe virus or develops a chronic illness, telling them they simply didn't think pure thoughts feels incredibly harsh.
Hmm.
In an era where we understand genetics and pathogens, does the author really argue that physical habits, medicine, and diet don't matter?
It is crucial to understand the uncompromising absolute nature of James Allen's 1904 perspective here.
Yeah.
He isn't necessarily saying that diet doesn't exist or that it has zero effect. Rather, he is arguing about the direction of causality.
Direction of causality, like what comes first.
Right. The text states point blank that a change of diet will not help those who will not change their thoughts.
Wow. So the mental state overrides the physical input entirely.
In this framework, yes. The argument is that the mind operates the machine of the body. If the mind is defiled by chronic fear, stress, or negativity, the body's systems will reflect that impurity and breakdown, regardless of how much organic food you consume.
That's intense.
And it goes even further to explain the mechanism. It states that when thoughts are truly pure, we no longer even desire impure food. The internal psychological shift naturally and effortlessly dictates the external physical habit.
Oh, I see. It's like trying to paint over a rotting wall instead of calling a plumber to fix the leak inside the wall. Like, the paint might look good for a day, but the rot is going to bleed right back through.
That is a perfect analogy. You have to fix the internal leak first.
Mhm.
And the text uses this haunting, poetic imagery of the aging process to drive this point home.
About wrinkles, right?
Yeah, it describes how wrinkles aren't merely a product of time and gravity. They're literally carved into our faces by the habitual paths of our thoughts. It notes that some wrinkles are drawn by a lifetime of sympathy and pure thought, leaving a serene, beautiful face even in old age, while other wrinkles are deeply carved by years of negative emotions, bitterness, and discontent.
We all know people whose faces just look like they've been sculpted by a lifetime of scowling, you know?
Absolutely.
Okay, so if we accept this premise, if negative thoughts can carve bitter wrinkles into our faces, destroy our immune systems, and bankrupt our businesses through self-sabotage, how do we actively stop the spiral?
That's the big question.
Because simply telling someone, hey, stop thinking bad thoughts, has never worked in the history of humanity. How do you take control of the wheel when you realize your mental garden is completely overrun with nettles?
Well, the author identifies the fundamental root of all this chaotic weed growing as aimlessness.
Huelessness.
Yes, but importantly, aimlessness isn't just described as a passive weakness. The text explicitly categorizes aimlessness as an active vice.
An active vice. That feels like a very strong word for just being a bit lost or, not knowing what you want to do with your career. Why is it an active vice?
Because, again, nature abhors vacuum. The text uses a really powerful metaphor here. It compares a mind without a specific purpose to a bark of thought, like a small, rudderless boat that is just allowed to drift aimlessly upon the volatile ocean of life.
And a drifting boat usually hits rocks.
Exactly. If you're just drifting without a destination, you aren't just standing still. You are actively guaranteeing your own destruction because you will eventually be smashed against the rocks of circumstance. Without a purpose to focus on, the mind defaults to fear, worry, and petty drama to occupy itself.
So what does this all mean for the listener? How do they avoid drifting? Like, what's the practical, mechanical step they can take today to stop drifting and start steering?
The text demands that we must find a central purpose in our lives, and we must throw ourselves entirely into its attainment.
So just pick a goal and go all in.
Yes. Now, this purpose could be a lofty spiritual ideal, or it could be a very practical material objective, depending on where you are in your personal development. But whatever it is, it must become the supreme centralizing focal point of your thoughts.
I see. It acts as an anchor for your attention.
Exactly. When you have that centralizing purpose, it structurally saves you from falling prey to petty worries, fears, and self-pity. The author views all those things, worry, fear, self-pity, as symptoms of mental weakness. And weakness, just like a deliberately planned crime, leads inevitably to failure.
That makes total sense, because if you are hyper-focused on executing your purpose, you literally do not have the mental bandwidth or the time to sit around watering the weeds of self-pity. You're too busy cultivating the crop you actually want to harvest.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture of the book's philosophy, the actual physical attainment of the purpose almost becomes secondary to the psychological process of pursuing it.
Wait, secondary?
Yeah, the text notes something fascinating. Even if you fail again and again to accomplish your purpose, which you likely will initially, until you overcome your deeply ingrained internal weaknesses, the sheer strength of character you forge along the way is the true measure of success.
That is such a vital reframing of how we view setbacks.
It really changes everything. That newly built mental strength becomes the sturdy foundation for future triumphs.
So the failure isn't a reflection of a cruel, unfair universe targeting you. The failure is simply the necessary resistance training required to build the mental muscle you lacked.
Yes, the purpose is simply the focal point that forces you to finally start tending to your garden with intention.
Which brings us beautifully back to where we started. To summarize the core overweighting message of this deep dive for you listening, you are the master weaver of both your inner character and your outer circumstances.
You're not a victim.
Exactly. You are not a helpless victim of your environment. Your environment is simply a mirror reflecting the current state of your mind. If you want to change the world around you, your finances, your health, your relationships, you cannot start by punching the mirror. You have to start by pulling the weeds in your own mental garden, finding a singular purpose, and relentlessly planting seeds of constructive thought.
This raises an important question, though, something for you to really mull over as we wrap up.
Oh, lay it on us.
At the very end of our source material, the text includes a snippet of a poem. It claims that the human will is an unseen, almost magical force that can hew away to any goal and literally command tyrant circumstance to step aside and take a servant's place.
I love that. Command tyrant circumstance.
Right. It says the human will can break through walls of granite.
That's a powerful image.
It is. But if our current physical reality is indeed the solidified manifestation of years and years of our past thoughts, like if we have spent a decade unknowingly building those thick granite walls of circumstance, is there a time lag built into this universal law?
Oh, well, a time lag.
Yeah, I mean, if you aggressively change your thoughts today, if you manage to plant nothing but perfect, purposeful seeds starting right this second, how long does the human will actually take to break through that granite and physically rebuild your circumstances tomorrow? How long do you have to patiently tend to a new garden before the new fruit finally appears?
Man, that is the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Yeah.
It takes time for a seed to break through the soil. And maybe that frustrating waiting period, that time lag, is where the real ultimate test of our character actually happens.
I think you're right.
Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into As You Think. We hope this conversation sparked a new perspective for you. So the next time you're sitting in traffic or driving to work, maybe think about Mark Allen wearing out that cassette tape and ask yourself what seeds you're going to plant today. Keep pulling those weeds. Catch you next time.